Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Shaun Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. You know, many times on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, we focus on one issue or topic as if challenges run independent of each other, like as if they're in some sort of independent stream. Well, this episode, we throw that completely out the window and attempt to cover a cloud of issues in farm management. There are many issues impacting the farmers and ranchers of today. You know, running a farm business, you know this, is quite frankly not very easy, and it's not a cakewalk as if it ever was, but agricultural entrepreneurs must be able to balance so many things, but they are definitely up to the task as you're a fan of this podcast. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. You know, many of the variables being juggled by the entrepreneur are not mutually exclusive of each other at all, and they don't run in some sort of siloed isolation. Like any business, things are complicated for the farm manager. Today's episode features a discussion with Evan Shout, CEO of Maverick Ag and the lead coach at Farmer Coach. Evan and I steer through a number of interrelated topics like human resources, farm succession, delegation, and goal setting. Enjoy. Evan, welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Thank you.
Great to chat with you. There's a lot happening in the area of farm management. I mean, I'm really curious. You guys are running the Farmer Coach program. You're CEO of Maverick Ag. You're talking to a lot of different farmers across a pretty vast geography. Is there a common challenge that a lot of farm businesses are trying to solve, whether they're just like a broad brush, 100,000 foot, there's a real common issue that you're having to deal with on a regular basis?
You're going to like this one because it's probably not something you'd expect, but human resources. Ever since RBC came out with their last inclination of what's going on in the industry and how short we are and everything else that's coming down the pipeline, honestly, 90% of the meetings I have either revolve around HR or are caused by having shortage of HR right now.
It's a tough one to solve too, because, unemployment very, very low. Like, in Canada, if you think the job market's tight at just over 5%, in the US, it's just over 3%, which is even harder to gather. So what are some of the things that those farmers are doing to try to solve this issue? What answers do you have for them?
Well, I mean, the answers can go anywhere from the education component of where we're looking for guys. So, I mean, obviously we've reached out to old college and stuff like that with some of the I'm dealing with, trying to get expertise in agriculture. The other part is in ag, we've never had a career on a primary producer farm. So you start as a rock picker. You tell me 20 years later, what job you're going to be doing, right? So part of what we're trying to do is create that career progression on a farm that's never had to deal with human resources. So that's the biggest challenge, is actually people realizing there's an opportunity on primary producer farms all the way back to grade 3 on. I mean, other than the kids of the ownership, it's not very often somebody says, I want to work on a farm, right?
A good friend of mine who farms Saskatchewan, pretty good sized farm, he just reminded me of a story, frustration that he was going through where, somebody that worked for him for a couple of years came and said, hey, I quit. They're like, well, what? Like, why? And he's like, well, I got to get a real job. I can't make this isn't a career. I got to get a real job. And he was like really mad because he's like, how is this not a real job? That tractor you're running is like $800,000. The combine's over $1 million. This is a real thing. There's a bit of a perception issue as we try to attract people into the industry too, right?
A perception issue, but it's on both sides, right? So we've always had this whole setup of ownership comes back to the farm. We haven't needed labor. I mean, until consolidation started happening, human resources really wasn't a discussion on farms at all. And now all of a sudden that's being brought to the forefront. the other part of it is farms themselves have never really had to set up the farm for human resources. I mean, how many times so I farmed with my dad. I never sat down and gave him a performance review, right? Yeah. So that's the theory, is we've never had those processes in place to actually have human resources on farms, whether it's process reviews, goals. I mean, any of those things that people kind of shiver at in industry when they have to do them, those have never been brought to primary producer ag. So it's not hard to see why they don't consider it a career.
Yeah. And this really does impact farms. You know, you could have one staff member all the way up to where, you're, maybe you got 50. It's the same challenge. It just, how many headaches do you have? But it's really the same challenge, because if I'm looking, and that's the thing, in some ways it actually impacts the middle and the small more so, because if I have, say, 2 hired people to help me and one of them quits, I've just lost 50% of my workforce. If I've got 50 and one person quits, okay, well, maybe we can slot somebody else in there and, hey, can you work a little bit more this week? Like, you can manage it. But for the smaller farm, this is a huge challenge.
Well, and we always joke that the hardest human resources there is family members. So yeah. I get a lot of farms saying, it's just dad and son, or dad and daughter, or mom and daughter. And they speak out that, well, we don't have HR. We don't have any hired employees. Mm-hmm. Well, what you don't realize is you're living an HR nightmare, because most of the times dad and son or whoever have taken the same education. So you're fighting for the same role in the farm just to begin with. You don't have open communication. You don't have HR processes. I mean, those are the HR ones I get more than the 30,000 acre farms that have 20 employees. Those ones usually have already started the process of setting it up. It's the smaller farms where HR is actually having the most effect in my eyes.
Why? So that perception is real. Okay. Cause I've had people that have, listened to some of the podcasts that we've done here with Mind Your Farm Business, and they've said, yeah, HR, no, not my thing. We don't have any hired people, but then they're working with their 2 brothers, and, hey, are you and your brothers getting along? Oh no, we fight all the time. We argue like crazy. Dude, that's that's dealing with people. It's like, the hiring and firing and all of that, that's just like one section of it. But HR is about motivation and roles and responsibilities. There's just all leadership. All that is encompassed in there. A lot of people are sort of pushing it away, and they're kind of missing a big component of something that would really, really help them.
Well, it even falls back to the point, like there was a Twitter poll the one day I was looking at of how many acres per employee they were using, and some of the smaller farms were coming out and saying, well, we do it all ourselves. We're a 4,000 or 3,000 acre farm. It's just us. And somehow that's a badge of honor, and it shouldn't be, because technically there's so many roles on a farm, from CEO through operations all the way down to janitor. If you're doing everything, something's getting missed. So that's where, even on the family side, is that if you don't have the roles and responsibilities, as you said, or haven't had the communication on that, something's getting missed. And that's where the miss in HR is.
We did a survey with Real Agri Studies in one of our past months talking about learning and development. And when it came to learning and development, HR was one of the lowest things that people had rated. And I think it has to do with this miscategorization that we don't have a hired person, even though we're on a multi-generational farm. There's multiple generations working together. There could be siblings that you're working with, and people saying, well, it still doesn't apply to me. And you can cross apply a lot of those skills. And that came up in our survey results, for sure. But at the same time, we don't actually have a lot of learning and development opportunities when it comes to HR. We really, a lot of times, have to search out into other industries or broader markets.
Well, and I think that's one of, like you said, the misconceptions is we talk about HR, and especially when in the coaching side of it, we'll tell them things that they should be doing, and they look at us like these are magical things that we've created. And it's like, well, no, every other industry is already doing these. We just need to get them implemented into agriculture. And that's the hardest part, is most businesses in Saskatoon, for example, where I am, at a certain size, they have a human resources manager or whatever it might be. Well, farms have already surpassed that size in terms of revenue or equity, but they don't have that person, and they've never been taught how to be that person. So it is literally the number one issue that I get brought to my table.
Yeah, for sure. And earlier you just mentioned delegation. If you're trying to do everything, you've got a problem. That also fits into this, as whether you're the farm CEO, so to speak, or your bottom rung, trying to figure out those roles and responsibilities and who should be doing what that leads to higher profitability at the farm level. I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs, never mind farm managers, struggle with. I think just entrepreneurs in general struggle with something like delegation.
Well, and I think part of it ties back to find out what you're good at, right? Like most of us, especially in agriculture, try to do everything. Well, if you're really good at the operations side of agriculture, that's where human resources starts coming in, is because the things you're not good at, don't do them, delegate them, find somebody that is good at them, because trying to be the best of everything, we've already seen this in every industry. You're going to fail. Where if you focus on what you're good at, whether it's operations, maybe it's the CEO role, maybe you are good at running those big business meetings, that's where you should be playing most of your time, and leave the operations and everything else to people you can hire that are better at it than you, or at least a lower pay grade than you. Because that's the kicker, is that you're probably the most expensive person on your farm. You probably shouldn't be sweeping the floor of the shop.
And maybe do it once in a while to show kind of leadership, but not every.
Yeah.
So how do you how do you go through that discovery process though? Like, how do you go through that process to understand, where, the old phrase of, like you said, do what you love, or, do what you're good at. What does that look like?
Well, I think, and part of it is I'm cheating with you a bit, Shaun, is that both my business partner and I have attended Strategic Coach in Toronto. So a lot of the stuff I'm talking about, I've gone through it from a training perspective, especially on the entrepreneur side.
Yeah.
So it's you need to get that aha moment, especially with farmers. And I find that if you can get the aha moment, that's you're winning. So for us, it's, let's write down every task on a farm, from agronomy to operations to finance. Like, if you break it out, you're doing 20 to 30 tasks on a farm that are actual roles and responsibilities. And then have them put their name in the boxes that they're doing. And all of a sudden, if their name's in 20 to 30 boxes,
yeah,
we got a problem. And that comes down to, even if it's just father, son, or father, daughter, or whatever it might be, usually both their names are in every box. Like, we need to start getting those role responsibilities split up, because, and I find that flows through into succession as well. The reason we have succession transition problems in ag is because everybody's trying to do the exact same roles. It's really hard to success something when you're not a perfectionist at one thing, you're a perfectionist at all, right?
Yeah. Do you think, though, some of those challenges, though, too, have to do with traditionally people's identity has been that farm? And so it's hard to succeed from something when it's like, it's like they're succeeding out of their own skin. It's we're not snakes, we're not reptiles. It's incredibly uncomfortable.
Well, I find a lot of guys, they lose that sense of purpose, right? Like that's the thing with retirement discussions and succession discussions, is the last thing you want is to not have a purpose. But the part of it is you just have to figure out what that purpose is. So if for the last 30 years, your purpose has been to put the crop in and get it off, was that really the purpose, or was the purpose that you enjoyed running the farm, or that you enjoyed the financial side of it? So once you find the purpose, that's where succession gets easier, because then the next generation starts taking those tasks that maybe aren't your purpose or aren't your enjoyment. They get those off your plate. So now you can slow down and still be a huge part of the farm, but you're doing your ability. And then that's where it comes down to, is most of it's just a discussion and discovery piece of, why are you trying to do everything? You're not the best at everything. And once they realize that and start the delegation process, that I find fixes a lot of communication issues as well.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast with Evan Shout, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. No matter where you're at in your agricultural career, succession has probably crossed your mind. Whether you have an idea to help the next generation thrive or just want to get a head start, RBC can help tailor a succession plan for you. Ensure that ownership of your operation, as well as your skills and knowledge, are easily passed on. Visit rbc.com/succession to learn more.
When you talk to the members of your farmer coach program, I would imagine that you mentioned HR, but succession has got to be in like close in that sort of like challenge, because I'm always amazed by it in the sense that you go during the winter, you go to a conference, you go to a show, there's always somebody talking about like succession, and we tend to share the train wrecks and did you hear about that, that farm, that was a big farm. Yeah, too bad it's all blown up. Like, just couldn't get along or whatever happened. With all of the education that's out there and all the service providers to help people, it's still a major, major challenge. And maybe that's because the dollars are getting bigger. I'm not really sure, but it feels like this is still this barrier that is we're still working to overcome it. Do you hear these same sorts of things in the group, in the farms that are a member of your farmer coach groups?
We do. I think there's two reasons. One, you said the dollars are getting huge. I mean, we've seen equity in farms over the last decade 10x. So, I mean, yes, dollars and cents make it a lot harder discussion. The other part that we've seen is it's more how do I say it? It's more a discussion of business versus lifestyle. So we've always treated agriculture like a lifestyle. And don't get me wrong, I grew up on a farm. I love farming. I love agriculture. That's why I'm in the role I'm in. But if we don't treat it like a business, it tends to take us to a lot of wrong decisions. And that's where I find a lot of the succession issues go, especially when we're talking in coach and stuff, is once you take the emotion out of it and have discussions from a business standpoint of, what's fair, what's equitable, whose land are we paying fair market on the land, on the investment? Like, once you break it down into the simplest of actual fair and equitable, succession actually is much easier. And even on the roles and responsibilities, once you have defined clear roles and responsibilities, a lot of the emotion to succession kind of falls to the side. And once that's set up, we always used to joke that succession, the true goal of succession was to sit down and have Christmas supper together. But then what we realized that if you're going bankrupt because the business isn't running well, Christmas still is not a fun time. So it's that discussion, right? Yeah.
So I've seen you write a little bit about some of the business versus lifestyle, and how it kind of is a balance, right? Because I think about I have a good friend that he runs a consulting business and in a certain industry, and there's very much a lifestyle component to that. He wants to be his own boss. He can take off when he wants to. It's a lot of the same things that a farmer would say, to be honest with you. But it's really, it's not one or the other. It's understanding the interplay so that you have balance on those two things. Now, it may ebb and flow, right? But at least you're achieving the appropriate balance for that moment in time is what it's really about.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, it's not one or the other. And I hope that's not what people are taking from the blogs that we write, is that you need both. It's just, you have to find, like you said, you have to find the balance of running a really good business, which gives you the ability to really enjoy the lifestyle, where if you focus too much on the lifestyle and the dream of farming, I like to call it, is which is the lifestyle, and forget about the business, it's a really crappy lifestyle in the end, because if the business fails, the lifestyle fails. And that's where stress and mental health and everything that we have in agriculture, that's where those are born from, in my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think back to the early days of starting RealAgriculture, right? I was passionate about it, still am. Early days, kind of a lifestyle. I enjoyed to travel. I was going all over the place, meeting people, getting to see different angles of the industry. It took time for it to become a business. And if it was, 15 years later, still kind of lifestyle and still trying to figure out how we're going to, pay a few bills, that would be, there's a reality check that comes with that. That is, it's sort of like, hey, what are you doing? And so I think this is very, very common across many, many different industries for sure. As you look at the horizon and what we have in front of us from an agriculture perspective, you got HR, you got succession. Do you think there's the strategic planning? Because that was something else that came up in some of our Real Agri studies. There's a lot of people working in the business, not necessarily on the business, was kind of one of our perceptions that, I know you got a lot of people that are coming into your farmer coach program. Those people are trying to work on their business, right? They're identifying, I got to got to kind of get above some of the prop wash a little bit here. I think, my perception is that we need more people thinking out on the horizon, not just what land they're going to purchase. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm actually like strategically thinking about their operation.
Well, and like you said, that's part of the coaching program was, first of all, get them off the farm, put down the cell phones, have them sit in class, because that gets their minds off of the business. And then let's start working on it. So then it's, how many farms have looked 10 years out? Like, actually sat down and put on paper what a 10-year goal is. Most would have thought about it in their head, but they've never actually put pen to paper. So once you do that, all of a sudden, those kind of start to become real. And then you start breaking it down into 3 years, 1 year. Like, what am I doing today that's going to get me to that 10-year vision or strategy? And that's what we're talking about, is it's that plan of attack. It's not that we have to get there, and it's not that you have to grow. Like, it's not about growth. It's about having a plan and actually sticking to it and actually working day to day to get there.
Yeah.
And that's what most farms don't have.
Okay. So we did a poll at RealAgriculture.com, and we asked people to write down their goals. And I don't have the results in front of me, but it was like 15% of people write down their goals, which blew me away, because what are we doing? Because like the data shows if you just write it down, you are like significantly increasing the probability that you're going to achieve that goal. So why are we not doing this?
It's never been done before in ag, and we like to hold on to that. And B, it's an uncomfortable conversation. I mean, part of what I love about the coaching program is we do have a few father-sons in the program. Well, watch what happens when they write down their 10-year goals, because I promise you, they're not the same.
Yeah.
And those discussions have never happened. And that's, like you said, 15% have actually done it. Well, that's part of the problem with succession, transition, HR. I mean, it ties to everything, is that nobody's ever had a strategy. We've never said, what do we look like in 10 years? So then when there's a conflict between family members, well, part of it was that neither of you actually said what you wanted. It was literally all of a sudden some land came up and I want to buy it and I don't. Well, did we actually make a plan that we were going to grow to a certain size or shoot for this? And nobody ever does. So then all of a sudden those conversations, now they're uncomfortable, right?
In the book Traction, which I know you know very well, great book. Encourage everybody out there, if you have not read Traction, encourage you to buy a copy and to keep it by your side. It's something I refer to all the time. And it's interesting in that book when you're there's something called the VTO. Anyway, there's a process where you're the leadership team. So it could be a family farm unit. The family gets together and you talk about the 10-year goals of the operation. And, it makes it very clear these goals may change.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They're going to. It's 10 years. Like, a lot changes in 2 years, never mind 10. But it says right there in the book, as everybody discusses their 10-year goals, this could be uncomfortable, because there could be a lot of disagreement in terms of how. And what's funny is that when we don't have these talks, a lot of times we just sort of think that everybody sees it like we do. And I don't care if it's marriage or a business or some, a buddy relationship. That's many times not the case. People don't learn through osmosis. And so it's actually a really interesting thing to go through, whether you can write them down or not, just for fun, have that discussion and see where it leads you, because you're going to find out there's a lot of different opinions around that table.
Well, and obviously we run the EOS system internally at HGB, so that's the book Traction, what it pretty much covers. And the first time we sat down, I mean, I'm on the leadership team, and we got family members, we have non-family members. So imagine a farm not only with family members, but now we bring in two people. So Jeff and I, the COO and the CFO, who aren't part of the family, and now you've got a mesh of, everybody's opinion, right? And I mean, the other part is in the coaching program, we had a father-son, and the first session they set their 10 years, and they actually went home and they shared it with his wife. And by the time they were done, he said they were in tears, because they'd never had a discussion on what the farm was going to be or what retirement looked like or anything. Because as farmers, we never want to retire. But once they had that discussion, like you said, they were almost down to tears, because they'd never had the discussion of what their future looked like. So it's those stories. I mean, it's those strategies that matter.
Yeah. And do you think that What did you see as the benefit going through that process? It like you said it earlier, not necessarily, it's not the achievement.
No.
It's like it's the journey. And there's probably a really, really good motivational saying that sums that up, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and it's the mindset. And I mean, I hate to use a Bill Gates quote on an agriculture podcast, but essentially you overestimate what you do in 1 year and underestimate what you do in 10, right? So it's just opening your mind to what could be, right? Because that's the biggest thing is as farmers or even as just entrepreneurs, we're so focused on day to day that we just, it almost makes us internal pessimists of what the future could hold. Well, by looking out and, putting it on paper and just saying, best case scenario, what could happen in the next 10 years? It almost gives you motivation and optimism and it drives you. So then when you look at them next year, well, did we achieve some of them? Are we on route for them? And what you'll notice is that, like for us, when we hit year 3 of EOS, we'd achieved some of our 10-year goals already.
Yeah.
Because we wrote them down.
And you knew what they were.
Yeah. And we focused on them and you set goals throughout the year to get to them. So, I mean, it's that process that people, I think, is the eye opener is that once they're on paper, they kind of become real all of a sudden, right?
Yeah. You mentioned badges of honor, and I think many industries have them. Entrepreneurs have them. It just kind of goes with the role. There's been a lot of focus on, the refresh, the recharge as that's attached to, trying to deal with mental health and on a personal level, things like that. What are you seeing amongst some of the farms that you talk to, that you work with? Are they regularly scheduling when it works, because the farm's a busy place, but when it works to do, just sort of shut the phone off, get away, recharge, and what are they doing?
Well, I think part of it is they've realized there is a change of focus, right? Like when I was in public accounting, the focus was chargeable hours, right? So I thought success was having the most chargeable hours or beating my last year's hours worked. Well, as farmers, I think we did the same thing as we did it as we can do it all ourselves, or, I got this many acres in, or however it might be. A lot of the guys I'm working with now, that their purpose or their change goes from freedom of money to freedom of time. They want to own their calendar. So if their kid's got a hockey game and they're in the middle of harvest, I have farms that will actually take a day off during harvest themselves to go watch their kids play hockey while their team continues. And I'm not saying you can do that on all farms, but it's that option of owning your calendar and you being in charge of your time. That's the true freedom. And I always have these conversations as we always focus on money because we want to make more money because that's going to lead us to get what we want in life. I think money just buys us time. And time's the one thing that we all want is we want to go on holidays. We want to spend more time with the kids. We're looking for freedom of time. It's just money happens to open that up for us in the preliminary, right?
Hey, Evan, this has been fantastic. Great insight, great thoughts, great perspective. Really appreciate you joining us here for the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Thank you, Shaun.
We covered a lot of ground with Evan Shaun of Maverick Ag here today, but one of the things that stuck out to me was when we discussed the idea that you need to work on the business and not always in the business. So pretty wise words there. This is hard for, I think, any entrepreneur as the business owner, especially if you either started the business or many of you probably feel like you're kind of responsible for a lot of the majority of the growth throughout the years if you've been there for a while. This is difficult. Getting out of the day-to-day to-dos and thinking more strategically about the business will serve you so well. Farmers are really practical, get it done kind of people. So for many of you, this is a little bit of a challenge. You didn't get into farming because you're like, oh, I love strategic planning. No, many of you got into it because you love working with livestock, you like running equipment, you like growing crops and things like that, and that's just fine. But as the farmer CEO, the farm manager, you've got new responsibilities that you need to tackle as well. Challenge yourself a couple times a year to do this. It will help with some of the other issues we discussed in today's podcast episode. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank for being the sponsor of this podcast. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.